Right now, it is time to bring in David Tereshchuk. It's time for the Media Beat. You can find David on his own website, themediabeat.us. He's also a PBS television correspondent reporting on ethics and belief. And he joins us live just about every Friday morning and back in the media capital of the world. Good morning, David.
Yes, good morning to you. I'm back in the media capital of the world, without a doubt. New York City, hometown. I'm really feeling in the thick of things after being in a very, very quiet place way up in Maine. Very different here.
You know, it's interesting you say that. I lived 1 year in Maine, okay? And I always say to people when they say, well, how was your year in Maine? Because you're not really an outsider, a person that likes to go outdoors and hike and stuff like that. So I said, you're right. It was like being on the outside of a fishbowl, and you're looking in at the fish swimming and in their own world of their own. And when you live in Maine, you're definitely looking into that fishbowl. You're not part of it.
You're looking in on the outdoors.
Well, anyway,
the great outdoors. Yes.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't share that, I imagine Maine can be not all that rewarding for you. But of course, people who live there and the many who flock, even now in a period of restricted, well, not restricted, but not officially restricted, but certainly minimized travel. The main tourist industry is certainly taken a hard knock, but still there are lots of people there coming from out of state to enjoy not just the beauty of Maine, but the relative safety in terms of the pandemic that Maine has to offer too. So yeah, it's very strange to be back in the New York area, because it's you get a very quick and stern reminder that the country is in a very serious condition when you come back to streets that you know so well, but they're now filled with restaurants spilling out because people can't go into restaurants to eat anymore. One of the sort of salient features of New York life, dining out at all sorts of levels, not just fine dining, but regular grab a meal quickly or pizza even, is a much changed scene now. Many lanes of traffic are no longer open for traffic because they've got tables and chairs in them. It's the most remarkable change to New York's traditional scene.
Well, the pandemic, I think, will leave its indelible mark for many, many, many years. No matter where you are, but let's take a look at when you mentioned New York, you go back. Let's look at the President of the United States, who wants what he wants, and if he can't get it, he threatens, and he's threatened just about every Democratic-controlled city with cutting off funding,
including his own home city of New York, of course, and it's led to the inevitable reaction from New Yorkers, not least the mayor of New York.
It's interesting because he doesn't even have the authority. So, of course, that's up to Congress.
When has that ever stopped this president blustering about what he will do? The question of whether or not he has the authority is almost irrelevant to him. But New Yorkers are annoyed by it, not least the people in charge of the purse strings in New York, who, because like every other city, it's been thwacked seriously and possibly fatally by the extraordinary pressures on it enforced by the pandemic and the restrictions we have to undergo to fight the pandemic. And the tax base for New York, like any other city, is plummeted, and of course local authorities can't do what the national authority can do. The national authority can live on a deficit, and of course it could even print more money too. That's not an option open to our cities and municipalities. They have to balance the books. So the downward spiraling effect of the economic fallout of the pandemic is even more serious for the cities, because then, of course, they lose their tax base, they have to lay off their workers, and we got even more of an economic recession, getting to scenes very like the Great Depression of the 30s. The scenes of bread lines in New York now are another startling reminder that we are in a wholly changed situation now, a desperately serious one.
I don't think people in the country understand that when finally something is found, that a vaccine, and when everything calms down a little bit, there are going to be so many businesses that don't reopen. There are going to be, and it's already being shown, unemployment rolls. It was a little under 1 million this past week, but an additional 800,000 people being laid off from work, even as the pandemic slightly gets better and more businesses try to reopen. The long-term economic hit on this country and the world is going to be amazing. And I really think you look at the stock market yesterday, where it lost almost in between 800 and 1,000 points. People are taking their money and getting it when they can in the stock market, and most people look at the stock market as an economic indicator for the country, but it is not really. It does show the uncertainty, the ups and downs. But boy, we've got a long struggle ahead of us, almost like when President Obama took over, and we had the financial crisis when President Obama took over. This is going to take years to come out of.
Yeah, that was a long haul coming out from 2008, 2009. But you know, and we were still, I mean, ironically enough, we were still enjoying the fruits of that recovery when Trump came in. And of course, Trump is now claiming credit for the economic well-being that we'd managed to reach by that stage. But of course, it was all part of that long haul that the Obama administration began. But that long haul is nothing compared to what I expect will be required of us all to put up with for the next decade, possibly longer. I think you're right. It's inevitable that our lasting impact from this many-faceted crisis is going to be a distinctly lasting one.
And that's just the financial recovery. The emotional recovery of this country, which is hindered right now simply because it's an election season, but nothing more put on display. First of all, the curiosity of both presidential candidates going into a zone where there were riots is a little suspect. But the American people got to see two different versions of what the future can be like when situations come up. They got to see once again President Trump and the way he handles things in communities that are devastated by something shocking. And then you got to see the way Joe Biden, and I would say 99.9% of the presidents should handle and do handle and did handle the same situation. Just a glaring difference on display in the way things were handled by the office of the president over the past week.
Yes, the political visits because that's what they were. I mean, we needn't take sides in this argument about which side was trying to take political advantage in an election period from the killing. I'm really sorry. That's the kind of mistake that I'm constantly trying to stop other people making. But in Kenosha, the shooting and paralyzing, mercifully not the killing, but still horribly, a horrible piece of police excessive violence exacted on Jacob Blake, the man paralyzed now, and both candidates for the presidency rushed to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and you're right. It's a study in contrast. What is on offer to the country, and although I know people in Kenosha, and I suspect I would be one of them, are resenting politicians coming in at all at a time of such a horrible event as this, and the shock to the community. But of course, you know, this is realpolitik. This is political realism. Of course, candidates would be going, and I don't think that's ever going to change. But what the approach that each person brought was highly instructive. Trump went nowhere near the family involved, talked only to business people and law enforcement. Biden, very different, spent time with the family and made a strong message out of bringing people together. None of the combative, abusive stuff that Trump was offering us. And you're right that this reflects the emotional state of the country as a whole in many ways. One of the other things I noticed, you couldn't fail to notice if you were in New York City, as I have been now just for a couple of days, but last night a demonstration at the crossroads of the world in Times Square, because New Yorkers now are up in arms about a death in police custody. Daniel Prude in Rochester, way to the north of the state, having its ripples throughout the state. This mentally distressed man held down on the ground by police. Another horrific scene for us to consider in video from video recordings of it. All, of course, happening some time ago, and the truth about it only coming out over time. And of course, the bitterest irony of all is that in this case, it was this mentally disturbed man's own brother who called the police in, and in their care, which is a word that I use with heavy irony, Daniel Prude died, and the Prude family are now, staging protests with many supporters in Rochester, but their sympathizers here in New York City held a demonstration in Times Square, and again, not an unfamiliar scene. A car tries to drive through the crowd, injuring people as it went, and we've got these horrible echoes of other scenes that we've had in the last 2 years. As you say, the emotional brittleness of our country at the moment in response to this triple crisis, the pandemic, the economic fallout of the pandemic, and the racial injustice being exposed so clearly time and time again. There is bound to be. You're absolutely right. There is bound to be lasting impact.
It's you look at what policemen and by what I'm about to say is no way condoning what happens all too much in this country, which is outright just plain racism. But you look at our country. Look at the state of teachers. Teachers in schools now, in grammar schools and high schools, have far more on their plate. They have to worry about, they have to look for marks on children. They have to look where children, far more than just teaching. And police, same thing. It used to be when a thing was called in like this, maybe the fire department would go out with medics, and also maybe from a mental health prospect, somebody would be there. All this now has been cut, and now it's just policemen that are sent out to deal with situations that they obviously are woefully prepared to deal with. And you know what? The population that gets hit the hardest on this is the minority population. It's just plain and simple truth. We have a systemic problem in this country. We have to realize it. We have to come to grips with it and find out how we end this systemic problem of racism in this country, because 9 times out of 10, when policemen are called or policewomen are called to an incident now, more than likely it's going to involve someone who's either black or brown or not white, and it just has to change.
Yeah, and it's no wonder, of course, that you get an argument building up to the oversimplistic phrase is defund the police. But what people who really have thought this through are actually wanting is that provision of resources to the police that is appropriate, and the shifting of the spending that gets done on local police forces for armaments and the highly weaponized and almost militaristic kind of gear that they have, and instead shifting it towards the kind of mental health resources that would be of a lot more assistance and a lot more use in the situations that you're describing, in which police forces are hitherto have been, as you say, woefully unprepared for, and inevitably the systemic nature of this problem is not going to be reversed until we do shift resources significantly, and to decry this as some kind of anti-police position is a terrible misunderstanding of what's required here. People want changes in police behavior, and obviously it's going to happen. It's only a question now of how slowly this important reform is going to take. And you're quite right. It's systemic in the sense that it's a matter of systems being cast in a certain way, which are really hard to alter, like a large ship liner, ocean-going liner that you have to move and change course. But also systemic in the sense that it's buried in our own systems. It's almost in our genes, in the sense that it's certainly a deep part of the nation's psyche. And I don't know if you have our fanfare available, but I really want to point to a piece of journalism this last week as has been putting its finger on the systemic nature of our racial injustice problem at the moment, done by journalists who are dedicated to covering the wider picture and giving us a fuller understanding.
We have our introduction for that. Here we go. There you go.
Yeah, I want to find the good and praise it, and this week I can find a lot of good in the reporting of guess what, listener supported public broadcasting. I think it's an area that is unsung, as we know. We're biased, each of us, I guess, you in radio and me on PBS television, but the public broadcasting comes into its own at times like this, when you really need the thoughtful and reflective journalism that is on offer. And in one of the parts of the country terribly afflicted by conflict at the moment, in Oregon, we've got a wonderful example of that thoroughgoing journalism being applied, and in particular by, all the, of course, Oregon includes Portland, of course, so all the problems of Portland have been very thoroughly reported by Oregon Public Broadcasting too. But they've cast their net wider and have been doing some great, really thoroughgoing background explanatory pieces. And Emily Curitan, a journalist there, an award-winning journalist locally, has been doing some terrific work, and in particular stepped away from Portland to the small town, a very illustrative instance. A good piece of microcosmic reporting to explain a broader picture. In Central Oregon, there's a town of Prineville. It's only 10,000 residents. Fewer than 1% are black. So that's the scene setting that they did for us. And then Curitan's gone into the business of finding out what minority populations think in a place like that. And of course, there is distress. There is a small black population, but of course they have suffered, just like black populations everywhere, from the systemic racism that you were talking about, Marshall. And in this particular case, protests were taken to the door of the police chief. Dale Cummins is his name, and then that exchange between the Black Lives Matter supporters and the police chief was described on social media, and then the police chief himself decided to go into the business of social media promotion of his own case, and you got this rather bitter argument developing, and the tone of the whole thing getting very nasty. And Curitin, the reporter, goes right to the heart of the matter by interviewing the people who turned out in the streets on either side, because of course there are confrontations in the street. And remember, this is a small town, not in any sense a seething cauldron, but nonetheless, thanks to, and this is another piece of the good reporting that's gone on here, she underlines that a militia has shown up as well in this situation. The Oregon 3%ers have a particular militia called the Zone 5 militia for that particular part of Central Oregon, I imagine, with their assault rifles and their makeshift zip tie kind of handcuffs. And what goes on there is a kind of horribly demonstrative instance of a community riven by the kind of racism, underlying racism, which we know is a kind of pandemic in itself, and a long-lasting one. She found interviewees who were remarkably clear about the bitterness in their attitudes. One interviewee actually said that Black Lives Matter was just disturbing the regular life of their small town by talking about things that don't matter. And there was a crispness and a clarity to Curitin's reporting there, just letting people's own words speak for themselves. And it's one of those pieces of journalism which I think are so essential for us to know how deeply runs the racism of our country, and how deeply runs the passion to have it changed, and seeing it all in this tiny, well-focused demonstration, and almost a glass petri dish in which to see these forces playing out. It was a really hopeful piece of journalism.
You know, I sit here in 2020, and I listen to people that don't understand what the term systemic racism means. And I go back and I want to say, read your history books. For gosh sakes, we blew up British ships in Boston Harbor because we were taxed without representation. You have to think back and put yourselves in the shoes of someone who's being oppressed, and we can't seem to do that in its entirety in this country. No, we can't correct the errors that we did over our 200 and some odd year history. That's impossible to do. But we can be better people. We can be a better country. We can aspire to be better. And I think that's what most people running for president want this country to do, to aspire to be better. And you know what? That aspiring to be better is now turned into a war. And it's I just don't know how it ends. I don't think it ends with an election, no matter who gets elected.
Well, of course not. I mean, but that is the formula of the argument. I mean, as a good and sharp journalist yourself, you've cast it in exactly the right terms. Do we aspire to be better, or are we content to solidify our prejudices and our injustices of the past, and continue to live with them, proclaiming meanwhile that we're somehow making America great again. Do we want to root ourselves irrevocably in the past, or do we, as you say, aspire for better things in the future?
Just look at South Africa, and there's a lot of problems in South Africa. There's no doubt about it. But South Africa has come a long, long way. It still has a long, long way to go, because politics is the ultimate interferer in advancement sometimes. But we in this country do have to wake up. We can't keep living in the past, and we can't keep refighting battles that have been fought.
Yeah, someone I interviewed constantly over the decades about South Africa was Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and he had the job when apartheid was finally ended in terms of its systemic and official existence, that is. But what he had the job of doing is helping to usher the new country into a state of healing after this horrific couple of centuries of outrageous cruelty. And the method that the South Africans chose, and other countries have been modeling it since, is the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Now, it takes me a huge effort of imagination to construe that America is capable of doing something of the same, but it's something to think about. The point about Truth and Reconciliation is that you first had to admit what you'd done, and only then could, with the truth fully in the air and opened out, could then people make some attempt to forgive and move forward. So is that possible here? I hope so. But not necessarily through the same mechanism, but something of that revolutionary kind of change in public attitude is clearly necessary.
David, we'll speak to you next week. Have a great week, and enjoy the weekend.
You too. Thanks very much.
David Tereshchuk, the Media Beat, here on Robin Hood Radio.